Well, tonight I have the great privilege to introduce three photographic artists who consider the past and the future, whose work reflects explorations both personal and universal, each with a unique presentation and perspective into the human experience. I've been so honored to spend the first half of 2022 with these artists and have been inspired by their bravery, intuition, and insights. And for the talks tonight, I think it's important. I have encouraged the artists to tell their stories about their childhoods, about their growing up, and their careers that weren't photographic. I think it's important to tell our stories to reveal the stew of influences that we bring to photography. All three of these talks are from the 2022 masterclass taught through LACP. And as I said, it was a complete privilege to work with these artists. First off, we start with Lynda SmithSchick. I met Lynda in 2015 at a workshop that I taught in Santa Fe, and we became friends. And over the past 7 years, I've witnessed her growth, her determination, and her talent. Lynda finds beauty and possibility in all areas of her life, no matter how difficult or challenging. She's an advocate for changing how we consider aging, and through her delicate and stunning work, she shifts our thinking of how to age well. I'm going to read Lynda's bio. Lynda SmithSchick is a photographic artist, and she studies the natural world as a metaphorical expression of spirit, environmental issues, and social justice concerns. She often uses natural materials to handcraft or compose items to photograph. SmithSchick lives and works on the Gulf Coast and in the Midwest. She has exhibited globally in juried solo and group shows, including the Center of Photographic Art, the 11th and 13th Julia Margaret Cameron Award, the Colorado Photographic Arts Center, the Tagil Museum of Fine Arts, Space Place Gallery, Photo Nostrum Galleria, Photo Place Gallery, A. Smith Gallery, Oklahoma Visual Arts Coalition. She was featured in Lynn Scratch, and her work is held in private collections. Welcome, Lynda.
Taking time to join us this evening, and thank you, Aline, for your generous guidance and always helping your students to strive for their highest standard. Thank you, LACP, for hosting our talks and really the many resources you provide photographers. And class colleagues, I was honored being in class with you. You wowed, inspired, and challenged me. Tonight, I'll show you a little about my childhood and some influences growing up that helped shape the photographic artist that I am today. Then some photos from my travels. Next, I'll share 4 bodies of work related to the natural world. The first is about family. The second about being in the present moment. The third is an environmental concern. And finally, I'll share my series on aging. I once heard the remark, "You are the same older person as you were a younger person." This was true for me because I had childhood themes that continue through my life today. Love of the outdoors, photography, the arts, and creative self-expression through object making. Outdoor sports fed my adventuresome spirit and satisfied my need to be outdoors. By contrast, my indoor life was filled with object making using my artist's hands. And today my photography is process driven as I make and compose items to photograph. My appreciation of the visual arts was elevated by art classes, plus viewing my piano teacher's exquisite art collection. Around age 9, I began taking photographs with my treasured brownie box camera. I was fascinated with photography and I really had fun. I also loved looking at photographs in National Geographic. This house remained in our family for over 60 years. My family was represented by 3 generations in our small Oklahoma town, and there was a very strong sense of community. In fact, I have friends today that were in my kindergarten class. My dad and I graduated from the same high school. Mother was devoted to her 5 children. I was born in the middle. My mother was an English teacher and an accomplished china painter. Dad was a dentist who absolutely loved his profession and working with his hands, just like me. There were 7 dentists in our family, plus a dental hygienist. Shown here, he's at an Air Force dental clinic before he opened his private practice. My parents taught me to notice the unnoticed in the natural world, as they were keen observers. Mother's artist eye would identify and call my attention to the flora, the fauna, and subtle colors in the landscape. Dad was a staunch environmentalist, and I carry those concerns forward. My love of nature was fed by regular family outings in the Kiamishi Mountain Range and the Ouachita National Forest where we lived. Now the natural world is the backbone of my photography, and I am continually inspired and draw from nature's well of inspiration. When I step outside, the fresh air, the sights, the sounds, the smells of nature immediately connect me to the present moment. My to-do list and any tensions fall away with each step. I feel relaxed. So Wendell Berry said, "For a time, I rest in the grace of the world and am free." This still life series came about as I looked at family in a different way, trying to unravel family's complexities. Leonard Cohen said, "There's a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in." Now I'll show you a few of my travel photos because my curiosity to see new places was fueled by my family's extended driving vacations. As an adult, I've continued exploring the world through global travel. When I was just an adolescent, career counseling came unexpectedly when I saw a movie called Pillow Talk at this theater. Doris Day played an empowered New York interior designer, and though I was still quite young, I was inspired to major in interior design, and I did. I graduated from the University of Oklahoma, and after more extensive testing, went on to be accredited with the NCIDQ. I enjoyed a career in commercial and residential interior design. I continue to be intrigued how the principles and the elements of design are equally woven through both the practices of photography and interior design. Of course, with my sense of adventure and love of nature, I hiked into the rugged Boston mountain range to be married. My artist husband gave me a Nikon F camera and said, "Time spent making photos is time well spent." That camera was the beginning of my self-taught photography education. I always carried two camera bodies, one with color film and one with black and white film. Later, I participated in numerous photographic workshops at Anderson Ranch, Quartz Mountain Arts Institute, the Griffin Museum of Photography, of course, LACP, and Santa Fe photographic workshops. And that's where I met Aline over 8 years ago, among others. My children were patient muses. Let's move to my second body of work, which is about the present moment. This meditative series came about when I was confronted with the potential death of my husband. I found myself in a liminal space of distracting thoughts, which were pulling my life out of focus. And fear took up residence like a squatter in my thought life. He did heal over time. Despite my circumstances, I learned to embrace the present moment to bring my life back in focus. As I walked across a pasture one day, the water cannons that irrigate the grass suddenly turned on. I recognized the cascading water as the compelling photograph instead of the more obvious Rocky Mountain landscape in the distance. The best was in front of me. The blurred landscape paralleled my own sense of life out of focus, but seeing the water was stunning and ethereal. James Clear said, "We are always in the present moment, but seldom focused on it." Eckhart Tolle said, "The moment your attention turns to the now, you feel a presence, a stillness, a peace." Now we'll look at the third body of my work about an environmental concern called praising thistle. Shockingly, the monarch butterflies are now on the endangered species list. This is partly because the milk thistle is being eradicated through land development and pesticides. Milk thistle's flower produces abundant pollen and nectar, which is the primary food source for our pollinators. During their migrations, our pollinators, bees and butterflies, hummingbirds, are finding their roadside restaurants closed as milk thistle is dying away. During my scrutinization of milk thistle, I came to understand its place in the cycle of life, despite its being labeled a noxious weed. In my series, Praising Thistle, I take apart the milk thistle's flowers and the thorns and the leaves, and then I rearrange them into these constellation-like compositions that I photograph. I want to elevate milk thistle to something of beauty, because we can better appreciate our natural world, the web of life that sustains us, when we truly see its beauty and its worth. final body of my work to share with you spotlights aging. This series portrays the positive attributes of aging. I became interested in aging when people began profiling me into that age box. We're individuals, so chronological age is really unreliable to stereotype what a person is like, young or old. Ageism is the last ism. I researched the many myths about aging to find the truth. I construct faux flowers from parts of dried onions that I then photograph. I chose onions to represent aging because in our culture, both are considered lowly and dull. I use only members of the allium family. Studies show that the happiest people, besides children, are people in their 80s, and the most miserable people are middle-aged. Surprisingly, the happiest doctors are geriatricians. People evolve and add layers over time as they absorb the nourishment of life, both bitter and sweet, just like the onions evolve as they dry. Scientific studies reveal that a positive view of aging can extend a person's life by 7 years. Positive age beliefs also affect our memories to a very big degree. Another truth, brief memory lapses can happen at any age. So based on this information, which is it? A senior moment or a millennial moment? Once dried, I construct the onion parts to mimic a flower's petals, leaves, and pistils. And then finally, I photograph the faux flower that I've created. At least 3 types of memory improve with age. One such is pattern recognition. So if you're getting an X-ray, you're going to want a 70-year-old to read it, not a 30-year-old. We explore new things during the aging years, causing a reinvention of ourselves, like the onion's reinvention into the faux flower I make. The older years are like a staircase, bringing us into wisdom, wholeness, authenticity, says Jane Fonda. It becomes easier to focus on what truly matters. After all, aging is living, and it starts the minute we're born, says Joanne Friedland Roberts. I agree with Robert Browning as he invites us to grow old along with me. The best is yet to be. I now have a much higher regard for time as a finite resource. Tonight, all of you gave your gift of your time by coming, and it was an honor to share my life and my work with you. Thank you, LACP, again. Some of you already know of this, and some don't. Our Aline is synonymous with accomplished and amazing. Plus, she shares it with the fine art community. So I thank her from the bottom of my heart. Good evening, everybody.
Oh, thank you so much, Lynda. I did forget to ask if anyone has questions to please put them in the chat. And if you think of them, if I will try to answer some right now, but if you think of something you want to ask Lynda, put them in and we'll get to them at the end. Thank you so much for your eloquent and beautiful presentation tonight, Lynda. And I'm so glad that I'm having millennial moments on a regular basis. That's very comforting. So I appreciate your wisdom and your deep thinking on this subject. I think we all could benefit from that. So thank you. So you can unshare. The next artist tonight is Federica Armstrong. And unfortunately for us, she is in Italy with her family. But she, in preparation for tonight, made a wonderful video that we're going to share. Federica comes to photography with a passion for documentary projects, but in the last few years, she has shifted her focus into fine art to tell her own stories. Federica Armstrong is a visual storyteller born in Italy and currently residing in Palo Alto, California. Her storytelling practice includes documentary and fine art works focused on environmental and social issues, as well as personal narratives related to intimacy and belonging. Armstrong works as an independent photographer on editorial assignments and has collaborated with many nonprofits in the San Francisco Bay Area covering issues of homelessness, affordable housing, and healthcare. During the pandemic years, Armstrong has done extensive research on alternative processes to explore personal creative narratives that have led her to her latest project, The Dowry. Her work has been exhibited in numerous venues in the US and Europe, including the Harvard Art Museum, the Griffin Museum in Boston, the Filter Photo Gallery in Chicago, among others. Armstrong's images have been featured in the New York Times, Lens Blog, the Corriere della Sera Set magazine, excuse my Italian, the Hand magazine, and several other books and publications. Armstrong received a BA in tourism management in Italy and has studied photography at Foothills College in Los Altos, California. She is an alumni of the very prestigious 2014 Missouri Photo Workshop and the 15 College Workshop and has attended numerous workshops in the US and Europe. A selection of her work is part of the Harvard Art Museum permanent collection. In 2015, Federica has founded the Palo Alto Photography Forum, a lecture series showcasing distinguished photojournalists and promoting conversations on global and local issues through photography and visual storytelling. The forum hosts 2 to 3 events a year with an average attendance of 150 people per event. Previous speakers include Matt Black, Alex Webb, and Rebecca Norris, Jim Goldberg, Ed Kashi, Lynn Johnson, Stephanie Sinclair, Gideon Mendel, among others. So I would say welcome Federica, but I will say welcome Federica's video tonight. And
hello everyone, my name is Federica Armstrong and I'm a visual artist based in Palo Alto, California. I am delighted to share my work with you tonight. Thank you to the Los Angeles Center of Photography and to Aline Smithson for this opportunity. Without further ado, here is my presentation. My name is Federica Armstrong. I was born in Italy in a town called Novara, located about 50 kilometers west of Milan, in the northern part of Italy, in the region called Piedmont. I come from a middle-class family. My father was a businessman. He worked for a large food company based in Italy, and my mother was a homemaker. She had actually met my father when she was working as a secretary in the same office, and she became a homemaker when my sister was born. Her name is Anna, and I was born 4 years later. My father was a fairly quiet man, but my mother was certainly the life of the family. She had a larger than life personality, and my sister certainly looks after her as well, while I'm a little bit more like my father. Growing up, I went to Catholic schools. My mother came from a very religious family, so being Catholic was very important and a big part of my upbringing. It was fairly conservative education, not particularly artistic. But one episode that I remember is in third grade when the art teacher started giving us classes called Educazione all'immagine, or Education to Images. And one time she presented an image similar to the one on the right corner of a woman inside a glass, and proceeded to explain to us how framing a woman like that was really implying the use of a woman as a product, as something to be consumed, something to be used. And I remember being very struck by this idea that images could be allegories of other concepts, other ideas. And I like to think of that as my first lesson in photography. Another important episode related to photography of those years is my first experience being photographed by professional photographers. The image on the left-hand side is when, the occasion of my sister's first communion. We had our matching clothes made by my aunt, who was a seamstress, and we went to the local photographer. And it was a bit of an awkward experience. He seemed to not like the way we were smiling, and I remember feeling a little bit uncomfortable through it all. And I like to joke that that's the reason why to this day I'm much more comfortable behind the camera than in front. And more importantly, I'm the kind of photographer who doesn't like to direct people. I consider myself a documentary photographer, someone who likes to observe and really be more of a fly on the wall in terms of how I like to photograph. Other important aspect of my upbringing is the fact that I was traveling a lot when I was a teenager. My father was a businessman who had traveled a lot, so he really instilled both in my sister and I the desire to travel, the importance of learning foreign languages. So in the summer of my teenage years, I would go to England, to France, to Spain to learn foreign languages. And in those trips, my father would always give me the family camera. And so that's what really sparked my interest and my love for photography. Another important thing of those years is that I would meet in those trips people from all over the world. It was really exciting and really opened my mind to the idea of wanting to travel and really wanted to live abroad. And luckily, this happened after college. I moved to the States. I had studied business management, and I got a job offer to come and work in the US, in Chicago, for a tour company organizing travels for Americans going to Italy. And little did I know that a couple of years into living in the US, I met my husband, Dave, who also loved to travel. And so shortly after we got married, we were able to move to Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, because of a career move on the part of Dave. And this was when I finally started really dig deeper into photography. Up until then, photography had been more of a hobby. And this time, because my legal status in Malaysia as a spouse wouldn't allow me to actually work, I began to dedicate my time to photography. A friend who was a photographer recommended I work with black and white film. And so I set up my own darkroom and began to develop and print my film. I was also able to travel a lot in those years. And so this was the perfect playground to really dig deep in photography, really learn about lighting, composition, and really just enjoy the act of making photographs. What really became important to me in those years is realizing that what I love wasn't so much making just one good image, but creating stories through images. So the idea of documentary work is when it really began to sink in for me as what I really enjoy doing. The idea of exploring a subject or exploring an idea, a problem through images. This was also the time when the body of work by Sebastião Salgado, Exodus, was published. I was lucky enough to see it, and I was really blown away by his ability to create beautiful images, even in the most difficult of circumstances, and being able to tell stories, very difficult ones sometimes, but with a lot of grace and a lot of elegant images. And so this was also very formative for me in terms of the kind of work that I strive to do. Fast forward, after Malaysia, our Around the World tour continues to Tokyo. That's where my daughter was born. We were there for 4 years, and then we moved to Amsterdam, the Netherlands, for another 4 years. And throughout this time, photography continues to be a hobby, something that I dedicate myself to continuing to photograph, film, black and white. Fast forward 2009, we are finally back to the United States, this time in Palo Alto. And this is where I can really, start building my work as a photographer. I take classes. I really become much more intentional about the kind of work that I choose to do. And what becomes very apparent is that what I love to do is working for nonprofit organization, creating stories that can talk about the issues that we live in our communities. Being connected to the community around me is something that I value a lot. And so this was one example, a story that I did for Habitat for Humanity around the issues of house affordability. And this is the story of a woman. Her name is Amanda. She's in her early 30s. She has a full-time job. She also studies part-time, and she lives in the backyard of her mother, basically in a garage converted into a studio. And that's the only place she can afford. And she lives there with her 3 children. So it's a very difficult circumstances, really emblematic of the affordability crisis in the Bay Area. And lucky enough, Amanda, working with Habitat for Humanity, is able to do her volunteer hours, qualify for a loan, and eventually I was able to photograph her in the first day that she was moving into her home with her children. So I did a lot of stories like this. I really enjoy this type of documentary work because it feels that it really has a purpose. It has a way to explain problems in a different way. And I always felt that it was really always a privilege to be able to step into someone's lives and photograph them, sometimes in very difficult circumstances. Another story that I did that was self-directed instead was in 2014. I found out that the United Nations had declared it the year of family farming. And farming was something that I've been interested in for quite some time. In California especially, farming is really at the intersection of sustainability, of social issues and environmental problems. And so I took the opportunity to go around looking for families to photograph. And I was very lucky to find the Markegards. They live in San Gregorio, about 40 miles south of San Francisco along the coast with their 4 children and raising grass-fed cattle. And they do that in what is considered regenerative agriculture. So they keep their stock on the fields. They graze the grasses in a way that allows for the grasses to put deeper roots and therefore increase the amount of carbon that they can sequester. And it's really also good for the animals. This, though, was also the year of the very big year for the drought. So it was very apparent how they had to struggle sometimes, and they even had to bring the cattle in the other pasture north of San Francisco to really trying to feed them properly. It was also a beautiful story about family. This is one of the traits in my work. I often end up photographing situations with where family is really at the center of the story. And this was really a beautiful story of children being able to really connect with nature and really grow around it. Fast forward, end of 2016, a very different story, yet connected to the environment, to the community I'm part of. I was reading the local newspaper and found this article at the end of 2016 that was talking about TCE, a solvent, chemical compound that was used extensively in Silicon Valley during the manufacturing years, and it had been finally declared by the EPA a carcinogen. And the article continued to explain how Silicon Valley is full of sites called Superfund. Superfund is a classification created by the EPA in the 80s of the most toxic site in America. And I began digging deeper into this topic. I learned that there are over 1,000 sites today that are Superfund sites in America. And the largest number per county is in Santa Clara County, where Silicon Valley is located, where there are 23 sites, most of which are really the vestige of the manufacturing era of Silicon Valley. So I began photographing this story. This is the site of one of the Superfund sites in Palo Alto. It's now a soccer field, and it used to be the location of an HP factory. And I began to learn what TCE is. It's basically a chemical that was used as a solvent. It's often used also in dry cleaning environments. And it's toxic because in the case of Silicon Valley, it was used, and then eventually these chemicals were stored underground. They leaked into the ground and basically ended up contaminating the groundwater. And what happens today is that when the TCE evaporates, if it ends up outside in the open air, it's not a problem. But if it ends up inside the building, it gets trapped there, and there people can be exposed to, and can be it's a carcinogen. So I started photographing this site thinking that there would be locations that were abandoned or that were off limits, but instead realized that these are still locations that are used today, office buildings, location of worship. So obviously there are remediation in place, so the EPA is working to clean them up. In some cases, the contaminations have been very extensive, so it will take many decades to clean up those sites. And I felt that having lived for several years by then in Silicon Valley, I had really never heard of it. And I felt that it was important to photograph these locations and really make it known that this was happening. I was also able to link the images to the EPA pages and really give an explanation of the level of contamination. So, I also photographed this project with a film camera, a medium format film camera. At that point, I was interested in going back to film, and I find that working with a very slow and fully manual camera really allowed me to really take the time to understand those locations and really absorb them and photograph them in a way that could really, show how ubiquitous they are, and yet there is something still a little eerie about them. The project was very well received. It was published on the New York Times Lens blog, and last year it was also part of the exhibit Devour the Land that was hosted at the Harvard Art Museum. It's an exhibit with over 50 photographers that explored the effect of the industrial military complex on the American landscape. And another story that came out of this project is Children of Silicon Valley. I don't have the time to explain or to go deep into this story, but basically this is a story of women who had worked in factories in Silicon Valley during those years from the 60s into the 80s, manufacturing microchips. And they were exposed to very toxic chemicals, and eventually they gave birth to children with severe disabilities because of that. It's a very important story. It's something that is not known, and I think it really needs our attention, especially today, because the manufacturing of semiconductor is, planned to come back to the United States. And then it was 2020, and it was a really difficult time. And it was a time of loss, personally. Besides the pandemic, I was also going through a lot of personal issues. My husband was sick. My daughter left for college. So, it was a time of loneliness. And so I really enjoyed being out at night and photograph. It really gave me a sense of relief. I was also able to spend more time at home and engage in the alternative processes. I always wanted to try to go back to some sort of darkroom, a space where I could really explore creativity in a more freeing way and a little bit less directed than documentary work. So I experimented a lot with alternative processes, especially cyanotype. And then the loss of the pandemic kind of came to a full-blown hit when my mother passed away in January of 2021. She was 81 years old. She was still full of life, and she died unexpectedly. So it was a really, really hard thing to absorb and to process. And I realized that once again, art was really something that could really help me to process it. So while I went through her artifacts at home, I began to look at my family photo archive. My grandfather was really the first photographer in the family, my father's father. And through the archive, I began finding these negatives of an old wedding. It was a wedding that happened in my grandfather's village. These were neighbors that got married in the early 50s. And I really loved the sense of community and love that came through these images. So I began to transfer them on these old handkerchiefs through the cyanotype process, and also through additional toning. And I began to do this also with the pictures of my parents. It was very soothing at the time of mourning to really look at their images when they were young and in love. And really, I found tremendous comfort from going through these images, working with this old textile. I would take the time to wash them, to iron them. And these were really basic skills that were also a way to reconnect with my mother. These were the basic skills that she taught me when I was a child. And it was just beautiful to see their love, to experience something that perhaps in my older years I didn't see much of as they grow older. And so it was just nice to reconnect with them and see them in a way in a new light. It's funny how we evolve as people, and looking back at the images, we get glimpses of the way we were, or people that have evolved and have changed. And so in some ways this was also a way to kind of meditate on their lives. Many of the pictures were taken of either my father photographing my mother and vice versa. It was often when they were on trips, or maybe during their honeymoon. And these parallel images also somehow gave me a sense of how their life also was. My mother was a stay-at-home mom. My father was traveling a lot. And so especially as I grew older, their life were quite separate. And somehow this is also mimicked in those images. This is a panel that I made that is called a tavola, or at the table. And basically it's a composition of 12 napkins. It's quite large. It's about 70 inch by 50. And most of the images are of me and my sister growing up. And there are also some texts from my mother's diary, daily entries of what she was doing with us, going to the grocery store and stuff. And then there is one writing, the one at the bottom is actually the letter of resignation that she wrote when she was pregnant with my sister and she was very ill. And this is an installation. It's really a departure from any kind of work that I've done before. It's called In the Company of Strangers. And basically it's a sort of a meditation on the relationships of the people that brought me into this world. In a way, these are portraits of my 4 grandparents and my parents. And in a way, it's a kind of an ideal table that I've never been part of. 2 of my grandparents died before I was born, and so I never really witnessed a table like this. And in a way, this table, they are the guest, but at the same time, they're also the nourishment that I come from. And so it's really a meditation on transgenerational connection, also transgenerational trauma. They all grew up during World War II. And I think, even though my family was happy, but there were sometimes a sense that things had happened in the past that were difficult. And this is kind of like a way to explain that, or to kind of literally bring it to the table. Every dish is made of fabric that has been toned and cyanotyped, and the rim around, which is the shape of the plate, is really a plate that belonged to my grandmother. So also the tablecloth that is sitting on also belonged to my grandmother. So it's really a way of remembering my family and the ties that continue to connect me to them. Uh, this project is not finished yet. I'm still working on it. There are really a lot of ideas that I would like to explore. And I have to say, I've been incredibly happy to see that the project has resonated with a lot of people. It has received a lot of recognition, and I'm very grateful to have been able to, develop this body of work through Aline Smithson class. It was really helpful to be in a group and really be able to process what were really difficult emotions through art, and really being able to create something as a memory, as a legacy of my family, and especially my mother. So the project, like I said, is not finished. I hope you can continue to follow it. You can reach me on Instagram, Federica Armstrong, and you can follow also the website. And I thank you for listening to the presentation. And if you have any thoughts or any comments, I would love to hear from you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Federica, and really appreciate your legacy as someone that is looking very hard at the world and bringing things to light, whether personal or in the documentary realm. If anyone has a comment for Federica, just leave it in the Q&A, because we will save the Q&A and pass that on to her, as she was very disappointed not to be live tonight. I want to jump back to Lynda, because we did get questions, and I want to just take a minute to have Lynda answer some of those before we move on to Stephen. Jane Wheeler asked, your work is not only beautiful, but meaningful. What charges your creativity?
Well, nature a lot. And for example, my Praising Thistle series, when I was walking, just in my local park, I came across a lonely little thistle plant, and I was just really struck by it. So my husband and I dug it up, and I brought it home and set it in a bucket and just contemplated it. And then it just evolved in my head as I became more fascinated with it, more research. And so that's how that evolved. And so really, I just get fascinated with things. I like to, some of my still lifes that were represented in family, just, for example, I just saw a pincushion, and at the same time we were growing European cardoon flowers, and all of a sudden I thought, I think those go together. They're both kind of prickly, and the pincushion belonged to my sister. So that had deep meaning. So that particular photograph came out of just a fascination with objects, and then developing it from there.
Well, speaking of your still lifes, Kara Barnes asks, what led you to explore the genre of still life?
I took a workshop at Santa Fe Photographic Workshops, and it was a still life photographic workshop with Kimberly Witham. And I'd been so fascinated with having control over my process inside my home and using natural light. And so I'd been experimenting with that and doing all kinds of just objects and things. And so I decided to develop that area. And when I attended that workshop, and she was so helpful in that area, that then I just became really fascinated with accumulating things and composing them, and manipulating them, and developing them, and using natural light to photograph them.
Natalie wants to know if you photograph for your still lifes on black BG, or you render that later in Photoshop.
Well, both. It's both. I do photograph on usually black velvet or foam core or something like that. And then I also process and enhance the background if there's any imperfections that need taking out.
Mhm. Bonnie says, Lynda, beautiful, thoughtful presentation. Thank you so much. Was your work with the thistles a jumping off place for your later project with the onions?
Kind of in a way. That's interesting, Bonnie. But yeah, I did kind of get interested in the onions, but the onions just sort of took on a life of their own. It was, I was so interested in aging, as I said in my talk, and it was kind of in front of my face. Not that I, went there, it just was happening to me. So I started studying it, and I was trying to think how photographically do I represent aging? How do I represent what's going on inside me and what's coming at me from the outside world? So being a vegan, I peel a lot of onions and vegetables. And I was peeling an onion, and all of a sudden I just looked at it and I thought, well, that's it. I mean, there's so many similarities here with this onion and aging, as I pointed out already in my talk. And the layers is what just really got me. So that was kind of my jumping off point with that. Was
Yeah, and
organic.
I want to stress that all that last project, my blossoming years, are made of onions that she crafted herself. All those flowers she either painted or constructed, and they're all made of onions. So I just want to clarify that if you didn't realize. And then finally, Jackie asks, how does your travel photography inform your personal projects? Is there a relationship between the two, or are those sort of in two separate camps?
In a way, they're in two separate camps, but when I travel, it just broadens my horizons. It just opens my mind. It just, my everyday life is just really totally left at home. So I'm just really there and able to absorb and see new things and be inspired by new things. And so, of course, I bring that back home, and usually thinking in a little bit different way.
Mhm. All right, thank you so much. And just a reminder, if you had any comments for Federica, please put them in the chat so she can have some responses to look at when she gets the chat. And now our final artist talk is by the wonderful Stephen Starkman. I remember clearly when I first met Stephen. It was at a Zoom portfolio review, and I think it was his very first review, and I might have been his first reviewer. I'm not sure, but what struck me about Stephen was that he was so eager to learn, and he had such an open mind and open heart. And I really enjoyed our conversation. And then over the next year, I would see him on every Zoom. And it was always a treat to see his smiling face. And he was very present and really and excited to learn from whoever was talking. I was so thrilled to have Stephen as part of LACP's 2020 masterclass. And his presence touched and affected everyone in the group. During the class, he began a book on a life-altering diagnosis, and we are so excited to share the news that the book is available to order. I'm sure Stephen is going to talk about that. So this is such a wonderful sort of circle that we come to this. He's completed this project. Stephen Starkman is a visual artist based in Toronto, Canada. His work has been shown internationally and published in several book projects. Starkman strives to create bodies of work that exhibit a strong focus on aesthetic and creative values. His recent interests have shifted towards internally driven emotional photographic explorations that evolve with every iteration. He is committed to personal growth and exploration and open to the new worlds which now abound, such as the subject of his book. Welcome, Stephen. We are thrilled to have you here.
Thank you, Aline. I'm so glad to be here. It's almost like not knowing where I am. I'm sort of disassociated, but it's really terrific. And I want to thank not just you for your tutelage and for your wisdom and for your skills, but for your support and for your love through all this time. And of course, I would be remiss if I didn't thank the LACP as well, who I'm fairly thrilled with. So I'll start my talk by talking a little bit about, I don't know why my screen isn't sharing. There it is. It says with some qualification. There we go. So I'll start my talk with the title of the book that I've created. And then I'll go through a little bit of history of my photographic background, and then I'll get right to the book, which is a very special thing for me. So as you can see by the title, it's Proximity of Mortality, a visual artist's journey through cancer. And that'll give you some sort of idea of what's coming up. But before we get there, I'll sort of give you the happy smiling kid as an 8-year-old or 9-year-old in the house. So this is me then, and I had hair. I don't have any hair anymore. And these are my parents, who both died tragically very young of cancer. So that's been, my diagnosis, and it follows that our world sort of was surrounded by cancer and by cancer suffering. So way back in the beginning, interesting memories of this. That's my brother and I. So I'm the older one on the right, and that's my brother. A shout out to Mitch on the left, who has the most natural looking smile in the world, I think, and my mom. And we were just a very, I think Lynda said it before, there's cracks in every table. We were a solid table with lots of cracks. And here I am with my father way down in the bowels of the house, just sort of, spending our time together. As all sort of like young boys this age in the 60s, I became very fascinated with things like the space program. So this was Apollo going to the moon, and it was, well, I didn't take the photograph, but it was certainly an exciting time, and for a young boy to sort of dream about escaping the world and escaping the planet and getting out into space, it was probably a dream that's never ended. It's just an absolute beautiful sight to see that Earth hanging there in the middle of space, in the blackness of space. So eventually, with this hobby, I was given a telescope, which was something called a celestron, if anyone is of my age and predilection. And a celestron could do all sorts of things, like capture eclipses and all sorts of amazing, wonderful things in the world. But eventually I grew up and went to university, and I'll show you another picture with hair, since that seems to be the theme. And in university, I sort of got very interested in photography and started being the darkroom assistant. So I would be the person who would help the other students in the darkroom, and just found the magic of watching a latent image come to life in the darkroom tray. We all had, all of us at a certain age, all of us had that magic at the time. At one point, I went out and I bought myself a real camera. I figured, you know, I'm a guy, I like gear, I like all this other stuff which hides you from photography. So I went out and I bought this really expensive camera. And what I found out was the old adage is that it takes you take 10,000 truly awful pictures before you can take anything that's decent. So I had a marvelous time taking 10,000 truly awful pictures, like this one with its blue tongue sticking out at me. I have no idea why I took it, but there it is. Or this one with exceptional composition. Look at that line on the left, or the foot cut off on the bottom. So it's just learning your craft. It's learning the tools that you have. But eventually, if you stick to it, and I was in business, I was running retail stores and doing things like this, which I had to do because I didn't have any fallback, so I had to make the money. But photography was always a passion. And eventually I got reasonably good enough to make a decent composition, even if it's boring and the sky and the horizon's a bit crooked, and experiment a little bit with Polaroid, which I really enjoyed and really loved. So after the Polaroid period, this is my younger adulthood, I decided to get really serious about landscape. And landscape was something that didn't involve people. It was something that I could be standoffish on. And my very first workshop was to Antarctica. So I went from, you know, stay home or go big. This was not an easy trip in any way, shape, or form. And I met some friends on this trip that are still lifelong friends, which is amazing. It was back in 2005. So this is the ship that we traveled on, and we saw some truly wonderful sights. These were just fleeting moments, and just being able to capture it and share it was a wonderful feeling. Same with the sunsets, which lasted 3 hours in length because we were so far south. And that moon does happen to be upside down compared to the rest of us in North America. Continued landscapes in places such as Iceland. So this is up north in Iceland with the sun shining across the mountain range. And as close as a portrait as I could get at the time of those two people on a mountain, if you can see them. They're just to the left of that little rock. A little bit more. And of course, the glacier lagoon, which I don't know how that piece of ice on the left balanced the way it did. But I took 2 frames, and after the second frame, it just fell right over. Then I sort of became a little bit more interested in abstract, something that stretched the internal of my mind as opposed to the external. So abstracts became something that I would see very readily, very quickly. This one on a runway at an airport in Toronto. This is looking up the back of the engine, and I noticed how organic the shapes were. That even though this was punched out of hard metal and all sorts of other materials, it really looked flower-like. It looked really organic. It's how, you know, what we do to mimic life. Another picture that is fond to me is just very organic and very, and one of the few black and whites that I do as well. And then I sort of found myself doing more minimalism, no matter where I was. So there's all sorts of juxtapositions and negative space. I mean, these are only a few samples. There is scale, which is, I think, a wonderful thing to play with. And this was a favorite picture of mine. Gesture, just a minimal gesture. This is a photograph taken on the world's most crowded island in Colombia. Yet, of course, it could be taken anywhere because it's just an isolating photograph. And so it's a little mind game for myself. Whoops, I went the wrong way. And then just a study in red, blue, and black. So I also tried wildlife. And you'll see that wildlife was a bit of a stretch for me. And quite in fact, wildlife didn't work out too well at all for me. But I finally got up the courage to start approaching and shooting people, which sort of broke that barrier, that intimacy barrier, and dealing with them in a very intimate way. I think I might have repeated myself. This is a man doing his evening prayers on the top of a dune in the Sahara Desert. What I think is a really beautiful image. There's not a sharp pixel in this image whatsoever, but it tells a story. Shadows and light from people. And this is a photograph from Oaxaca, Mexico. And so is this one. This is a server bringing lunch down from the kitchen to us in the restaurant. So irrespective of whether I shoot forms of people or whole body shots of people, it just opened up a whole new world to me. And this is where I was before the pandemic. This was the type of thing that I sort of wanted to do and get better at. Lovely woman sitting in Colombia, just minding her business. And I asked if I could photograph her. And she said, yes, of course. And then all of a sudden, there were like 10 other people surrounding her. That's a fish head, not the one on the top with the red cap, but the one on the bottom. And, I asked his permission, and he was quite fine with it. And then just in Japan, just the symmetry of the form and the lines, which echo all throughout, which really appealed to me. I also ran into this woman who was in Japan, and her husband was trying to take her photograph with this little Instamatic camera, like not much bigger than an iPhone. And I pointed at my big, huge, expensive camera on my chest, and I said, I mimed it. I said, let me try. And we changed positions with the husband, and I shot her portrait through the natural window light. So the pandemic changed everything, as we all know. And the current work was a reaction in form and in color to distancing, to loneliness, to apparition, just to a whole different look. They're vastly different than the picture of that woman I just had shown you a few minutes ago, which was only a few months before. This is a photograph of an elevator going up to my wife, Debbie, and our favorite restaurant in Toronto. And it was on my birthday in March, and about 3 days later, everything closed down. Something kind of convoluted, something interesting to me. Muted colors, crushed dynamic range. distance, loneliness, glorious sunset, but didn't want to feel the glory, didn't feel it at all. So that's a little tour of the type of work I was doing before I got sick. And this is a photograph of the camera that my cousin Akiva gave to me after a trip when I was a teenager and got me really interested in photography, Pentax Spotmatic. But the reality is that this sort of brings me full circle in my life photographically, as well as in my life physically. So I'll go on now to the book project, which is a finished project. And I'll talk a little bit at first, and then I'll be quiet. So this is the cover, Visual Artist Journey Through Cancer, which is exactly what I meant it to be. And you can see that I have 3 essayists, one of whom is head of a cancer clinic in Christiane in Newark, Delaware, actually. Aline was kind enough and generous enough to commit to an essay, and so was Jonathan Blaustein. So I owe them all 3 a debt of gratitude for taking the time, the care, and the effort to make the book. What's the book? The book is that I was diagnosed with something called small cell lung cancer in July of 2021. And this is a very aggressive cancer with a very small survival rate of about 25%. The book is sort of a mashup of documentary images within the hospital and metaphorical images from outside and sort of nature images, things that I think I'll miss or that give me a certain feeling when I see it. It's not a narrative, but it is a narrative. So the story, basically, it's not the story, that's a narrative, but the photographs are for your interpretation. So when I go through the book, I'm not going to be speaking, but I'm going to read a little bit, but I won't be speaking offhand, which is why I'm talking a lot now. It also includes cancer survivors' statements. So I wanted to open up the book beyond just myself. I don't want it to be just about who I am. I wanted it to be about people who have survived cancer, at least to this point. And some wonderful poetry by a woman named Joanne Boyce, who's contributed to the book, and I'll read one of those poems. So in a way, this is sort of documents every day, even though I'm only halfway through my journey. This sort of documents it as we go on. So let me skip ahead. We've got a title page. I'll read this. It's dedicated to my wife, Debbie, whose undying love provided the key to my true happiness and unlocked my desire to live life to its fullest. And there couldn't be a truer sentence than that. So there's a essay by Dr. Petrelli. There's a beautiful essay by Aline Smithson. If anyone wants to hire her out, I will collect the fee. And then we get into the book. So I'm just going to go through this and let you interpret the images the way you feel. I don't want to project anything really into the images. Okay, I will stop and read this. This work is about the end of my life. This is expected within the next few weeks or months. I began this project shortly after my initial diagnosis of cancer. It is a visual representation of having cancer using images that are both documentary and metaphorical. The images are mine. The quotes and poems throughout the book are from other cancer patients. A few weeks after the conclusion of chemotherapy, a routine scan showed that the cancer has spread to my brain. And my understanding is that this is incurable. I have become and remain determined to finish this project, to create new images that reflect what I see and what I feel, to help myself and others express and deal with mortality. These are my images. This is my story, not only of my cancer, but also of those who generously shared their own most poignant moments. Go past this one, I'll read the next one. So these are some documentary photographs. They don't necessarily go with the quotes, and the people's names have been anonymized through a wonderful support center called Hearth Place near where I live. So I'll read the one on the right. To say I was scared would be an understatement. I was fearful. I felt hopeless. I did think I was going to die. I felt uneducated, clueless. I had so many questions and no answers. And again, the one on the right. No one can ever know, even if they too have had cancer, how you feel. You are alone in your journey, as no one has ever been you, with your unique childhood, your unique personality, your unique coping mechanisms. All anyone can ever be is scaffolding around you. You are alone, no matter how well supported you are. I have learned that I need to be my own scaffolding to deal with my fears. is from Joanne. It's called Hope. Some days I wish I could tear out the smeared and ugly pages of my story. Maybe it was the scars I don't speak about, or was it the day my little one's heartbeat was no longer heard? Or was it the day the doctor hung her head and gave you a diagnosis that would turn your world upside down? The small little things don't seem to matter. How do you not lose hope? How do you regain hope? I think of the black keys as I sit at the piano. They too play music. So does each of our experiences. When we've lost hope, I think it has a way of finding itself back to us. I think hope comes back on wings, be it a butterfly or cardinal. It settles beside us when we need it the most. On the right. In many ways, life after my cancer treatments was harder than the treatments themselves. I became overwhelmed by a whirlwind of emotions, anxiety, anger, sadness, and loneliness. 4 months later, I still experience brain fog and severe anxiety, but the other emotions are dissipating thanks to Cancer Support Center programs and support groups. Sleepless nights and restless days, a slight loss of balance after the radiation surgery to deal with a lesion in my brain. But I recovered enough as I write this to slowly find myself again working on this book. It's my lifeline, and truth be told, I hope I'm able to work until it's done and in my own hands. There are so many feelings which are complex and difficult to live with. Guilt for leaving loved ones behind. A strange sense that when I die, I will miss them, not the other way around. It is odd. I see things differently now. Sometimes it feels profound. Sometimes it is mindless. And if I'm lucky, sometimes it is with humor. My wife, Debbie, taught me to live for today, to lock up what's overwhelming and to be in the moment, to live as fully as possible every minute, every hour, every day. However, as always, peeking around the corner is fear and a clock that's ticking. And yet I still want to have hope. And on the right, as the end of my life is no longer such a mysterious unknown, I reflect that my regrets have little to do with what I've done, rather with what is left undone. Hug, laugh, look at the world's majesty and minutiae, spread joy and do. And Jonathan writes, thank you, Stephen, for allowing me to go along for the ride with you. I promise to think of you often when you're gone. And that's it.
Well, needless to say, that was incredibly powerful and moving. And I am thrilled that you are going to have the book in your hands if you don't already. That's really exciting. And it's such a amazing combination of beauty and reality. And I think it's a guidebook for all of us, in a sense, of how to live our lives. So I so appreciate all the effort you put into it. And I'm just so thrilled that it's a reality. So David Reinfeld says, Stephen, the book is beautiful and revealing, weaving the real and the emotional response. What was the process to put pictures together that give greater meaning to each other? And as an aside, hope is a good thing.
Hope is always a good thing. And I know David, and I know David needs to have hope in his life too. Not for himself necessarily, but for others that he loves. The sequencing was a collaboration between the designer, who has skills that I don't have, and myself. So it was very natural. It was very very without fear or trepidation. It was questioning back and forth and discussing back and forth. And the form of the book sort of took on a sense of non-narrative feelings with different, and I don't see this too often, with different media types. There's, I mean, I hate to say it because it's sort of like, it doesn't really matter. You know, there's pinhole lenses. Well, it's not a lens, but a pinhole. And film and digital, and you know, I just wanted it to shake up how I felt inside. Like if I was feeling a certain way one day, I just wanted it to look that way on the other, on the image. So it came together relatively easily. I was also quite motivated because I have terminal cancer. I needed to get this done. So it had to happen while I could still enjoy it and make it a meaningful part of my life.
Well, you're getting lots of comments. Candace B says, amazing work, Stephen. Thank you for sharing. Amy McCrory says, your work is uniquely yours, yet it touches me so deeply, so emotive and so contained. I am changed by you in the most positive way. This is not a question, just a statement. And then Laura shares, Stephen, your comment on scaffolding reminded me of this poem by Seamus Heaney. My friend Ross read it aloud at his wife Kathy's funeral, the bestest friend to so many in 2019. They had 4 children. The scaffolding of their relationship was well built. I'm not sure I fully understood the sentiment of that poem until just now. So thank you for that and for sharing your journey. And I'm going to read the poem. Masons, when they start upon a building, are careful to test out the scaffolding. Make sure that planks won't slip at busy points. Secure the ladders, tighten bolted joints. And yet all of this comes down when the job's done, showing off the walls of sure and solid stone. So if, my dear, there is sometimes seem to be old bridges breaking between you and me. Never fear, we may let the scaffolds fall, confident that we have built our wall.
It's beautiful.
Barbara Colbert says, thank you, dear Stephen, for sharing your brave journey with us. Jackie Rupp says, Stephen, you gave a stupendous presentation this evening. You're so courageous, brave, and talented, my friend. I'm so happy you were able to complete your book. It's beautiful, honest, and heartfelt. Question, how can we help you get it into the world?
Buy it.
Yeah, so it's on your website. It's for sale, correct?
It's on my website. It's in a link tree on Instagram and Facebook. I would like nothing more than to share it with people who would appreciate it and reflect upon it. Bookmaking, except for a very few number of people, is not a profitable endeavor. You eventually you lose money. I mean, but I'm fortunate enough to have that money right now in my life to lose. So speak of it by word of mouth, buy a copy, borrow a copy. I'm going to try to get it out there as much as possible because I'm quite proud of what I've done. So thank you.
And Janice just put the link to purchase in the chat. So if anyone is interested, I'm just going to keep going here. Joanne Carney Drake says, Stephen, it's been a privilege to be with you in class. It's beautiful. You are always inspiring. Alyssa Ohashi says, Stephen, what a beautiful presentation from such a beautiful soul. I love you and am grateful to you to hear you speak on your work. Claude Deemer says, thank you, Stephen, so powerful. Gina Park says, what a profound way to share this journey. Natalie said, love your artist's eye. Will you have prints available for selected images in your book?
I will eventually because as you can imagine, I'm kind of moving slower than normal.
Yeah.
So I'll have some special edition prints within books that you can choose, smaller ones, and then there'll be larger size ones that would be available for purchase. But all that's just a little ahead of the game for right now. So
yeah.
But yes.
Anonymous says, photos are so meaningful. They make you want to stop and contemplate its meaning. Karen Constine says, Stephen, I'm speechless and in awe. Our hearts are with you. Like Jackie, how can we help you and Debbie get this out in the world? I think we've covered that. Cass Stone says, thank you, Stephen, for your breathtaking self-portrait and profoundly beautiful images. Bonnie says, thank you, Stephen, such stunning images. I'm grateful to have taken this class with you and been inspired by your determination to put this book together. Andrew Mizniski, excuse my pronunciation. Bravo, Stephen, an outstanding accomplishment. The book is fabulous. Fran Foreman says, I'm stunned by your courage, honesty, and talent, Stephen. Each image is so compelling. My only question is, where can I get a copy of the book? And you can do that in the chat, Fran. Petra Jelenik says, Stephen, thank you for sharing your kindness and your journey with all of us. You are a most remarkable person. Your photographs and book are beautiful and inspiring. Christina Kobe says, no question, but we love you, Stephen. It's been such an honor to get to know you and share your journey over the past 6 months. Lori Maloney says, Stephen, you are as truthful as you are talented, as you are soulful. I am deeply grateful for your sharing, for your friendship, for your impact on our lives through your life and living and art. Big love. I think I can get to the end here. Krista says, Stephen, I've been touched deeply by your honesty, vulnerability, and transparency. I knew you were special and incredibly talented when I met you in Oaxaca. Thank you for being the beautiful person you are. I am so grateful for you and your amazing body of work. And John Hesketh says, thank you for sharing your personal light, dividing your vision between a poetic internal sight and the raw landscape of medicine. Can you explain how you arrived with this format? I have always been a fan.
I think part of it is having some drama in the book. Part of it is showing, well, let me back up a step. I haven't researched it very extensively, but I haven't seen a lot of books, photo books, created by the patient, created by, you know, the person who's afflicted, who has this lifelong imminent affliction. I've seen lots of books that were about family members and about people who are suffering and who are in great pain and in great need, but I haven't seen one, or I'm not aware of one that's self-generated. So I thought that I had a unique perspective, even though the story's not finished. That's fine. I have a unique perspective on being on the inside rather than the outside. And part of that story is being in the hospital and showing the IV drip and holding onto it and feeling horrible. And part of that story is the sun star over the lake, which is, even on the worst of days, there's hope. I'm giving away the interpretations now, which I said I wasn't going to do. But it's, and then the other thing was, the big thing was opening it up to other cancer survivors and finding different medium, finding the poetry from an authentic person who I met and know, and finding the story, like the poem of the scaffolding, from people who are wise and in so many ways. So it's an incredible drama to go back and forth, to turn the page and see something like that, which is so different. And then it's another piece of my own history.
Thank you. All right, just a few more. Ellie says, thank you, Stephen, for your courage, sharing this deep and powerful work. I'm so grateful to know you. Big love. Sally Peraglia from the first day in
Ushiwa.
I knew you would be my friend for life. Joanne B says, amazing photos. So honored to share some of your journey with you. You are inspiring. Marley says, you are so inspiring. So many people will be blessed by your hard work and sensitivity. I appreciate you. Marta Feinstein says, thank you for your courage. You are a kind person with such talent. You are amazing. My heart goes out to you and your family, and you have my support. I and so many others are here for you. This is so important, beautiful. No words can describe it. And hearing your talk, it brings tears to my eyes. I want to have hope for you, for healing miracles for you, and all those enduring illness. Keep creating your beautiful, moving photos for all of us. And finally, April says, Stephen, I'm so happy to have met you 5 years ago and enjoyed following your photography since that time. You are a wonderful, compassionate, inspiring, and brave man. And I thank you for sharing such a personal journey with us. Know that you touch people and leave a beautiful imprint with them. From April Glacier. Glacier. I'm sorry, April. So that concludes our evening, and I so appreciate Lynda and Federica and Stephen's really meaningful and powerful and emotional artist talks. And as I said, it's been a privilege to be on this journey with you. at least in the last year. And thank you so much for all of your efforts, and that includes Lynda and Federica too. I'm so proud of you and so thrilled that the world got to hear you speak tonight. So thank you.